Let's go a little deeper beyond terra firma. Gauteng had quite the start to the weekend with a recent earth tremor felt in various parts of the province at a 3.5 magnitude on the Richter scale, as recorded by South Africa's Council for Geoscience, 4.2 by the United States Geological Survey. Now, Dr. Alistair Sloan, lecturer of structural geology and tectonics at UCT, joins us again on the show to tell us a little bit more. Doc, great to connect with you this morning. Hopefully you are very well. Always a bit of a strange thing because we just don't expect it here in South Africa, but not the strongest tremor in Gauteng's history. This one was 3.5 on the Richter scale. Have we felt a much stronger tremor in the past?
Yes, so recently the largest one would be in 2014. There was the Orkney earthquake. So it was actually just over the border into the northwest province, but it was felt very much in Gauteng as well. At a 5.5, that caused damage to some people's houses, to some dwelling places, and it actually killed one person. Wow. Due to a wall collapse. So in this general area, there have been quite a few tremors in the past. These clusters of seismicity, which tend to be around the areas of deep mining, which have been, well recorded since the 70s and even before.
Are tremors detected fairly often in Gauteng? How often do we get the tremors? And I would assume many go undetected or unnoticed by people, but how often does this happen?
I mean, it really is something which is very common. So it'll be dozens of times a year, probably even hundreds of times a year. But most of those are so small that people aren't going to be able to feel them without very sensitive instruments.
So what is the specific cause of these tremors? Does it sit on a fault line? What was at the heart of it?
So basically, there are certain things which people can do which cause earthquakes. So deep mining is something which is associated usually with relatively small earthquakes, small events. There are also natural earthquakes which occur even in these very stable areas, not as frequently, but over long periods of time. And the larger events in places like Gauteng, it's difficult to say 100% for sure whether or not it's triggered by mining or whether it could have happened anyway. It could have been a natural tectonic event. So
how does
most of the earthquakes in the area are linked.
It's just breathing. It's just stretching itself as it does. But how does deep mining affect this specifically? How does that go on to cause a tremor?
So basically, when you remove material from deep in the earth, it changes the stresses in the area immediately around the mine. And usually that might lead to very small events occurring. So just the earth kind of adjusting itself to take into account the void which has been opened up in the mining. But sometimes if there's a pre-existing weakness, if there's a fault within the area, then it's possible something larger might be triggered.
Can Gauteng expect, you say it happens fairly often, how are we able to, can we predict these earthquakes, and how many are we expecting more in the near future? And is there an area in South Africa that gets more than the areas affected at the moment?
Sure, okay, so there would be questions there. So we could definitely expect more in the near future. I mean, once you have an event, and this magnitude 3.5 or 4.2 event is large enough that it's going to change the stresses in the area around it again, and so you get other events, usually smaller, which we call aftershocks. And we've seen some of those already. So on Sunday, there are a number of smaller events in the same general vicinity. So we can definitely expect some more coming up. In terms of where else we get earthquakes in South Africa, most of the larger earthquakes which we find in the country actually have occurred in different parts of South Africa. So there's been a history of seismic events in the Western Cape in particular. So the Siri-Storbach earthquake is one of the ones which was the largest and caused the most damage. But also in the Free State and in KZN, there are also historical records of reasonably large events.
Just finally, very quickly, the difference in readings between our own Council for Geoscience and the United States Geological Survey, how did that come about?
So you've asked the most difficult question as the final one.
Sorry, man.
It's difficult to answer this without getting slightly technical. But basically, the way that these magnitudes were found is by looking at stations and looking at what the amplitude of the wave that's recorded is at these different locations. So the South African network, where that came from, that catalogue, it has more stations closer around the earthquake, whereas the American network is relying more on international network, so their magnitude was mainly based on a station in Botswana. But as well as the difference in data, the way that they calculate the magnitudes is quite likely to have been different. So when you do this, you need to make assumptions about how well the rocks in the area can transmit the waves. So if they transmit them very well, then it means you can go further away, but you can still have a big amplitude.
Okay.
And you need a model. So probably they're using different models. Probably the South African Council for Geoscience will be using a more appropriate local model for calculating the magnitude.
We know our Earth and we know it well. Doc, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm not feeling terrified about any impending natural disasters, which is always a good thing. But thanks for demystifying that, and we really appreciate your time this morning.
No problem. Thanks a lot.
That's Dr. Alistair Sloan, Lecturer of Structural Geology and Tectonics at University of Cape Town, thanking him for his time and the information that will certainly put some anxiety at ease.